Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hi, it's Stacy. This is Walking in My Shoes, and we are loving my veteran. I want to say good morning, grab some more coffee, and get on today's subject. We're going to talk about treatments, treatment options, and ultimate responsibility for treatments. Um, I think a lot of times I've heard, I've seen spouses say, I want them to get help. They must get help. I'm demanding that they get help. They need to go to counseling. They need to be on these medications. They need to be on this. They need to do this. Then when they get on it, um, we don't always agree with what they're on. Good morning, Sarah. So that becomes a bigger issue. And as their advocate, we can fight for the best care available and look for the best options available. But at the end of the day, it is ultimately their responsibility. So let me talk about the subject first about a therapist. Okay, there's some things that we have to understand, and I hear this a lot. We see this a lot that your veteran will go to counseling or go to therapy, but the therapist doesn't tell you everything, or they may not tell their therapist everything. So the first thing you absolutely have to understand with any therapist, regardless of where they go, whether you're going or they're going individually, is that therapist is theirs. Good morning, Evelyn. Morning, Nakia. That therapist is theirs. That therapist is there for them to share whatever they're willing to share. That therapist is looking out for their best interest based on the information that they have. So we can sit here all day long and say, well, I don't like what the therapist says. You need to tell me what the therapist says. The therapist won't share with me. I get that. But at the end of the day, what is said between a therapist and their patient is confidential. Now, that's going to lead us to the next issue. A lot of times our veterans will go to therapy, or anybody will go to therapy, and they won't, good morning, dear, and they won't share everything. So there needs to be some form of communication. I agree, and we're trying to work on that bridge where we can communicate to the therapist, this is not what we're seeing on a daily basis. But at the end of the day, that therapist is their therapist. So understand that. Just like your therapist, if you choose to go to counseling, is your therapist, and what is said is confidential. So if you're going in and you're going to complain to your therapist about issues that are going on in your life, do you really want your therapist running to your veteran saying, well, they said this about you and that about you and this about you? No, you don't. So it is confidential. Another huge issue that we have, unfortunately, is a lot of these therapists have degrees, and they've gone to school, but they don't understand the dynamics of PTSD, especially combat PTSD and survivor's guilt PTSD. They don't understand those dynamics. They don't understand what happens when you mix it with a TBI. They have a checklist and it says this is what you should recommend for people who have this. Okay? Jeremy's therapist encouraged him to bring Christy, and there are times that that happens. But that is not the norm, always. So understand that finding a therapist is, in the words of Nakia, is like looking, a good therapist is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It is so hard to do. So understand that it may not be the answer that you want. I'm not saying it's not a viable option, but you have to understand that going into when you start talking to therapists, this is what happens. So there's one issue, okay? Um, in Nakia's case, she has to be allowed in by her Richard. Well, yes, she does. And we're going to talk about how that works out too as we go through today and tomorrow. So understand when we're talking about therapists what they do. Marriage counseling, same thing. We'll get a lot of couples that say, or a lot of spouses that say, I want them to go to marriage counseling. Well, that's beautiful as long as the marriage counselor is well versed in PTSD. As long as that counselor is well versed in PTSD. When you're sitting in marriage counseling with somebody who has PTSD, who already has a lower self-esteem, they already feel like they've made mistakes, they already feel like this is going on, and that therapist said, well, you have to change this, and you have to do this, and you're doing this wrong, and you're doing that wrong, where do you think that spirals them to be? Okay, so where do you think that spirals them to be? So again, same thing happens in marriage counseling. Make sure that when you are researching, good morning, Erica, when you are researching therapists, that you find therapists that are good for you and your veteran. Also understand that you can fire therapists, y'all. You don't have to stay with this therapist that isn't working for you. If it's not working, it's not working. Find somebody that does work. Find something that does work in that situation, and you can find them. It is a long process, and you can find them there. Also, now let's talk about the therapy room, okay? When you go in for counseling, let's think about this. So here is your therapist's desk. Their desk is so that their chair is facing the door. There are two little chairs that you're going to sit in that space. The veteran's back gets taken to the door. So make sure, again, think about where you're putting your veteran when it comes to therapy. Not saying it doesn't work, because it does work. Being able to talk to somebody that is objective and can see both sides is amazing. Being able to talk to somebody about all of your fears and your anger and your pain is amazing, and we should in fact do that. I'm not saying that therapy doesn't work. What I'm saying is that therapy does not work for everybody. And at the end of the day, no matter how much you want them to go to therapy, it is their choice and their option. So to give somebody an ultimatum, you're going to go to therapy or else, is not a good ultimatum. When you're setting your boundaries, you can sit in and say, you're not going to continue to do this, or I'm not letting this in my space anymore. Here are some options. But forcing somebody into therapy, if they're not going to buy in and do what the therapist said, is worthless. Okay, so get that whole picture as it comes together. It's important that we understand the picture as the picture starts to come together. You're going to also find that there are lots of good veteran support groups that are peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer. Talking to somebody who has been there where you are, maybe not in the exact same space, but been where you are, who can lead you down the right path to get good therapy, to get good treatment. That is exactly where we need to be. So peer-to-peer, we can look for peer-to-peer options available in our communities. Online, there's a lot of it, so peer-to-peer is amazing. If you happen to live in an area where there is a Buddy Up program, Janine Lutz is amazing, and she has an app called Vet Connect, which I encourage our veterans to get on, where they kind of form their own little battle group. If they're having a crisis, they can reach out. So it is an amazing program, and it is done peer-to-peer. So that is another option that is available. So just think about these when we're talking about options. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, which is we're going to talk vaguely on some of these topics and really delve into them as we go forward, but is medication. Also often we hear they need to get on meds, 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 they need to get on meds. For some people, meds work amazing. For other people, they don't. Okay, for some people, they're amazing. For other people, they don't. Yeah, and you have to, and Nakia's right. I didn't even think about this, Nakia. Thank you. It takes time to develop a trusting relationship with the therapist before they're really going to open up. And it doesn't happen as fast necessarily as we want it to. And with the way the telemed and some of this other stuff is working, you may not always get the same therapist, and that poses another problem. So that is also an issue that comes into play. Remember, none of these treatment options, and I think we all get frustrated because we all think that treatment options are an overnight fix, and they are not an overnight fix. They are not an overnight fix. Okay, so understand that. Next one. There are only two, that are approved by the FDA to be used to treat PTSD. Paxil and Zoloft. That's it. They're the only two that are approved to treat PTSD. I have heard stories, I have seen the med list, I have seen the stuff that some of our veterans are taking as many as 30 medications, 30. Telemed is this, it's virtual appointments there. They're taking as many as 30 prescription drugs. As your veterans advocate, it is essential that you go on to like drugs.com. You can punch it in, the medication that they're taking, and you can then, there's a thing called drug interaction. You can hit that button and type in like Paxil, and then everything else are taking one at a time, and it will tell you if there is a drug interaction. I know for somebody that we were talking to recently, the combination of drugs was a fatal combination, and nobody picked up on that. Nobody picked up on that this was a fatal combination if you took them. All right, so what we're finding happens is this. You go in and you're taking a medication for anxiety, for suicidal thoughts, for depression, for not being able to sleep, right? So they go in and they prescribe drug A, and we're just going to say it's Zoloft. I'm not going to get picky about which drug it is, okay? And your meds only work when you couple them with coping skills, right? It is truly important. None of it works by itself. So, yeah, and it is. Sterling is Zoloft in the VA. There's generic and there's name brand, and you have to, but either one will pull it up for you no matter how you type it in. So the side effects to that are, you ready for this? Insomnia. Yay. Or total sleep, being totally sleepy all the time. Or anger and depression and suicidal thoughts. Okay? So you have all these, I mean, there's a slew of others. So they're not working. Okay? So this drug is not working. They're still angry, they're still having suicidal thoughts, they're still having depression, they're still having insomnia, they're still having all these things. So they go back to their VA and they say, hey, this isn't working for me. So what do? They up the dosage. They up the dosage now. Now, okay, now what happens? Now your suicidal thoughts are worse, your anger is worse, your depression is worse, your rage is worse, your stuff is worse, because they have upped the dosage and not worked at the root of the cause. So this is a multi-level treatment. Coping skills are very important. The deep breathing exercises, Carl calls it boxing. It's the way he breathes. Therapy replacement, where you replace happy thoughts, replace your negative thoughts. All of those things work. So what we're happening is what we're seeing is that these drugs are being increased, which are only increasing the number of side effects. Start looking at your side effects. Start looking at what they can do. Start monitoring what is happening. Take the medication list and go in and say, hey, look, we have an issue here. There is no reason to take 30 drugs. Now you're taking drugs to combat the side effects of drugs. In the words of Boone, you are putting them on a combat cocktail, which are your painkillers, and zombie dope, which are to numb you out so you don't act this way. And they give you so many that that's the way you behave. And what happens, you become addicted. Right? So a lot of our veterans have pain. Let's get realistic. They jumped out of helicopters and out of airplanes. Well, not helicopters, but airplanes. And they jumped and they hit roadside bombs. And there's a lot of pain involved in that. So what do they give them? They give them opioids. Now we end up with an opioid addiction. Okay? So now we have this opioid addiction, and they're addicted to it. So what are we going to do? We're going to get them off of opioids. We're either going to use methadone or Suboxone. Okay? When you use that one, it has to be either one of those two drugs. You have to take exactly as prescribed. So if it tells you 3 times a day, you take it 3 times a day at the same time every day, or you go into DTs. Because there's all these technical words that go with drugs, like half-life and how long it lasts and how long it takes to get out of your system. So you have all of these are now coming into effect. So now your veterans decided, okay, I want to get off all the drugs. Okay, I want to get off all the drugs. So they're now taking Suboxone because they want to get rid of the opioids that they're already taking. So the opioids are gone. Now they're taking Suboxone. They're not taking it 3 times a day like they're supposed to. They're trying to take it twice a day because they want to get off. Now they're having DTs. So what do? They either go back to the opioids, or they disappear, or they become angry, or they have the shakes, or they do all these other things, and then they end up doing more drugs to combat the side effects of the drugs they were doing before. So this is the cycle that we get caught up in a lot of times. And a lot of times, y'all, they do this, your veterans do a lot of this because they hear us say to them over and over and over again, you need to take medicine, you need to get better, you need to do this, you need to do that. And so we watch this cycle go on. All right, so why we may want them to get help, and I encourage that at every cost, okay? It is nuts because we still have to be their advocate, 1, for care, and 2, we need to really be aware of their medications and start making them aware of their medications and their side effects and how they work. The next thing that we're seeing prescribed a lot, this is nuts to me, okay, nutso to me, is they're prescribing blood pressure medicine to help you sleep so it gets rid of the nightmares. I'm like, what? It's not labeled that way. There is stuff, if you will start reading theirs, called black box warnings. They warn of suicidal thoughts. They warn of suicidal ideations. They warn of homicidal issues. They warn of anger. And they are black box warnings. You need to know what drugs your veteran is taking that has black box warnings. Drugs.com, there's about 15 other sites you can go to that all that will print up. This is what is happening. Jennifer says, we battle that daily. He takes meds some days and not others. The mood swings were insane. He doubled up to counter the side effects. Exactly. And so what happens, the next big thing that happens, and this is like the number one thing we see in healthcare across the board. So it is not a mental health thing. It is not a PTSD thing. It is in healthcare across the board that I've seen for 20 years is we're prescribed medication. People are prescribed medication. They feel better, so they stop taking it because they think that they're better. All right? And these are more like lifelong drugs. These are not necessarily like your antibiotic, which most people stop taking halfway through, and then they end up with the infection they had to begin with because it comes right back. But I'm talking like blood pressure medicine, diabetes medications, your SSRIs, your antidepressants, all of these things. We stop taking them because we feel better. Right? We stop taking them because we feel better. And what happens is it's the drugs that made us get to this levelness. And then we stop taking them because we feel better. And then what happens? We're right back to where we started. We're right back to where we started. So we have to be super careful in that. Right, they need to understand that they feel good because they finally got that formula right. right? So you have to be able to be careful with this. They tell him to take an extra dose as needed if he feels like he needs it. Heck, they sent Michelle home with drugs and told her to cut the pills into a certain degree, like cut it in half and cut it in half again, and it was a very specific dosage to titrate it to effect, and she has no medical degree. Most people don't even know what the word titrate means. So we have to become their advocate. If you want care and you want them to get the help, we have to become the advocate. We have to become that one who says, this is it. I know for me, when I first started taking my medicine, which wasn't for that, but for the other stuff, Carl would insanely, 8 o'clock in the morning, hand me my pills. 9 o'clock, whatever the time I had to take them, he would hand them to me. And it drove me crazy. And then I'm like, I'll take them. Right? I need to take ownership of this. But what I found was I wasn't taking them. So now we go back in and I take certain pills at a certain time of the day. And within a half an hour, 45 minutes, he doesn't go to me and say, hey, did you take your medicine? He walks over and hands it to me. Right? And that's it. There's nothing else said. But taking medicine at a very specific time is essential to getting the right care because every drug has what they call a half-life. That's how long before it kicks in, and then it goes back into how long before it's gone. So every medication has that. You might have a veteran that is taking a prescription that is a slow release. Somebody else may have one that is taking it as an instant deal. So you can't compare drug to drug. You got to make sure that when you type it in, if it says slow release or whatever it is, you need to make sure that when you put that in, that all that little stuff goes in because it's important. And the good thing about them is they all have picture identifiers. And it doesn't matter if it's name brand or generic, all of the pictures of the drugs show up so you can look and make sure there's little itty bitty stuff etched on every single drug that is different from any other drug, and it is done for a reason. Okay, so that is important to understand. And I know this sounds kind of insane, but as we start tomorrow, when we really delve in to side effects and how all of it really works, you need to understand this basis. You need to understand about therapies, what they do. We're going to talk about some great alternatives that are out there. And again, I'm not telling you that it is a one-size-fits-all cure because PTSD is not a one-size-fits-all thing. I am not a therapist. I'm not licensed. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a prescriber. But I do know how to look at side effects and how they all come together. And as an advocate for my veteran, and even for myself with the medications I take, you know, you think about all the stuff in my laundry list that I have, this long, big laundry list that I have. I literally take 3 drugs to treat the laundry list, and I take 2 drugs to help the anxiety that are just minor, just because if you lived with this every day, you'd be freaked out. Yes, natural meds help too, but also be careful, Sarah, with natural meds. I am a firm believer in natural medication. But natural meds can change the effectiveness of the medication you are taking and change those side effects around. So if you're taking any drug and you're taking the natural in drugs.com, you can put in the natural that you're taking and it will tell you the interaction. So be careful. I am a firm believer in natural meds. If you can come off the other stuff, I'm all there. I am a firm believer in cannabis treatment. I think cannabis treatment is one of the things that we've had to deal with, and people have such a negative attitude. You know, here's your brain on drugs, fry the egg, and there's such good stuff coming from cannabis. And I'm not talking about necessarily the THC side. I'm talking about CBD side or both, right? I just think that it is important that we look at the other. And yes, Sarah, just because the meds are told to the psychiatrist, and if you're talking about cannabis, that's a little different, but if meds are told to the psychiatrist, don't think for 1 minute that they necessarily pick up on the interactions. These particular drugs that I'm talking about that had the fatal interaction were prescribed by the same doctor. The pharmacist went ahead and gave them, which should be your double tier, right? Your doctor and then the pharmacist. And do you know nobody caught up with it? Nobody figured it out? I love it. Cannabis is phenomenal for a TBI. Phenomenal. Right? Every physician on your veterans team should know every medication taken. And that is so important. Hydration is super important. You know, dehydration causes a humongous list of problems on its own. It can cause everything from chest pains to racing hearts to depression to constipation to dizziness. Hydration is critical, and we miss that a lot of times. Just be careful what you hydrate with. That's a whole nother topic. I, as my own advocate, and Carl as my advocate for my healthcare, I have a 3-ring binder. It is all divided. I have every lab test, I have every doctor's note, I have every drug I take, I have every side effect, and they're all in a 3-ring binder. So when they go to prescribe something new, we literally say, okay, how is this going to interact with this and this? And I'm taking the, and of course I'm at Mayo, so it's all in one system, like the VA should all be in one system, but imagine that. But those are the things that you have to really look at. There is some amazing, like I said, alternative treatments out there. Equine with horses and getting your brain to decross things in a different way. There is a new thing called art, and I don't mean like painting, it's called ART, that is showing some really phenomenal signs that they're reducing some of these symptoms in as little as one treatment, 1 to 5, and that can be done remotely, so it is freaking amazing. There are a lot of stuff out there that are grant driven. I know that Michelle and Damon went to a place yesterday and had acupuncture and healing touch done, and the first so many sessions to veterans and their family, can I reiterate that, are free, and then a grant picks up the next group of them. Okay, so there is a lot of that out there. I know, Sarah, we have to talk more. We have to talk way more about oxygen therapy, hyperbaric treatment for TBI. Hugs is who authorizes it be done. It has been phenomenal in what it's showing on TBIs. Okay? So it is super, super important that we get into this as we go forward. But yes, everybody on your team should know everything. Everybody should know everything. But it's still your job as your veterans advocate to research it and ask questions. Because let me give you, this is the hardest thing for people to understand. We tend to walk into a doctor's office, whether veteran, non-veteran, doesn't matter. We tend to walk into a doctor's office, and because they have those little letters MD or DO or whatever behind their name, we tend to take what they have at face value. We do. We don't tend to think it's okay to question. It is very much okay to question. When you have anybody with multiple illnesses and lots of stuff going on, go, I have a notebook, a 3-ring binder notebook. It has questions, it has treatment options, it has this. I know every lab value, what it means, what does it say, what does it say about my health. And when I go in and talk to my physician, we ask those questions. Bottom line, whether we're paying for it or the VA is paying for it or whoever's paying for it, because you know the VA doctors do get paid to be there. Whoever's paying for it, they're getting paid to treat us. They're getting paid to treat our veterans. Okay? Yeah. They do this. And she said, doctors are not God, they make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Can you imagine if you had to keep up with every single drug that is out there on the market and there's new ones going on? You know, we're the only country, Carl tells me this all the time, we are the only country in the world who advertises medications to self-treat. For crying out loud now, you can poop in a little thing and go see if you have colon cancer markers. Nowhere else in the world do they do that. I watched that commercial yesterday, and the guy was sitting on the beach. It was a cartoon, right? And the guy was sitting on the beach, and the little colon cancer box walks up to him. Like, what was he gonna do? Poop in the box on the beach? But we're the only country in the world who advertises that. It is all about this lovely little stuff right here. And what you're gonna find is trends. Trends happen in medication. Okay, they happen in medication. When I first started in EMS, if you were having a heart attack, we gave you epinephrine and we gave you lidocaine. Those were the drugs of choice, right? Then all of a sudden it came back out and we gave you two totally different drugs. Do you know why? Because the drug companies were the ones who paid to have the books printed. Because the drug companies were the ones who were funding the research. Because that particular drug company wanted to get their drug out, so it became the drug of choice. Every prescription written by the cardiologist for this one particular drug, they got a kickback for. That happens on every level. When they come into the VA, because it's an open contract bid, right? And they come into the VA and they say, well, we're going to give you this drug at this price. But we're also going to give you a kickback if you start buying it. So you can get this, and now we're going to give you a kickback if you buy it, and we're going to be able to put money back into the system. What do you think people are going to advocate for? Right? It's all a money game. It's all about money. I can remember being a very brittle diabetic and needing a Dexcom. It's a continuous glucose monitor. It was at the time one of the only ones on the market. They now have multiple ones which are amazing. But it would send an alert to my phone and everybody else's phone in my family if my blood sugar dropped or if it got too extremely high, because I could go from 600 to 30 in a few hours. But do you know how hard we had to fight for a Dexcom? We had to fight, we had to pull teeth, we had to pull nails, we had to do whatever. But my insurance didn't want to pay for it. And we had to fight for this. It truly was life-saving for me. My blood sugar dropped to 30 in my sleep. And then it rapidly went down from there. And they could barely get me the stuff I needed to get it back up. Okay? Like in her case. In the cases, Richard would be dead without it. It is so there. Yeah, it was, at least it was a wonderful life. You know, when he wasn't there with the pharmacist when he made a mistake because of depression. It happens, okay? It happens. But as their advocate, you're another set of eyes. You have that right to say, but money funds a lot of our treatment. Money funds a lot of our treatment. So, do you want to make somebody rich because of the kickbacks, or do you want what's best for your veteran? Be their advocate. Go to drugs.com. And it's not about selling one or the other. It's about truly listing side effects and how they work. And you can go to the FDA's website and see what drugs are recommended, what are the new drugs out there, what are drugs that are promising. You can do that all on your own. It's a simple little process. So I wanted to kind of give you a little talk about therapy, and that you have to understand their therapist is theirs, your therapist is yours, marriage counseling is great, and just make sure they're aware of PTSD, and that we, to be able to communicate with our spouse's therapist is fine, but don't necessarily think they're going to tell you what they're saying, because that's a confidentiality issue. So you need to know that. You need to be like Jeremy's therapist. Find a therapist who encourages your spouse to be there. Find that therapist that does both sides of that coin. You can find them. Even in the VA system, if you got to say, you're fired, I'm moving to the next one. You have that right. You have that right. So again, look at drugs, look at drug interactions. Those are important and they're critical when it comes to this. We're going to look at alternatives. There are a lot of great alternatives out there. Because the bottom line is, the VA, like anywhere else, whether it is hospital, whether it is whatever, is driven by money. When I work for ambulance services, If I work for hospital-based ambulance services, the IV drip sets we used were specific to that hospital. The IV pumps that we used were specific to that hospital. Why? Because they got a kickback. Because they got a kickback on it. Ventilators, the same way. They got a kickback on it. And here's the dumb thing. You know, IV tubing doesn't transfer from one pump to another. So you got a critical patient and you bring them in on an IV pump from one hospital to the next. That tubing doesn't transfer from one to the other, and you have to pull the tubing and change the tubing and everything else. And one drug, like if I'm giving them heparin that comes from hospital A, hospital B won't even use what's in the rest of the bottle. They have to use their own thing. It's crazy, right? It's crazy. So, that's how it's driven. It's money driven. The binder idea, baby, I promise you, if you've got any illness at all that is major requiring work, is absolutely the best thing you can ever have. It goes with us on every trip, every car ride, everywhere. Literally, we can hand it to somebody and say, here it all is. You're not waiting to pull records. You're not questioning anything out of the blue. You're getting exactly what we have and what the doctors have. So it is incredibly important. So I know this was kind of a weird topic, and it wasn't like that motivational kick rah-rah speech like we normally do, but it is something I think we all have to understand. So encouraging therapy, encouraging treatment, encouraging getting help is all very important, but be careful what you're encouraging them to. Do your research. Do your research. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you can't force them. But when they see that you become their advocate and you are looking for best options without side effects, and you're looking at best plan, and you're really doing some research behind it, they're going to be so much more receptive to that instead of the mentality of just drug me and I'm going to sit here like a zombie. Because I remember early on, you know, it was, here, take two. The drug of choice for the military was ibuprofen. Here, take some ibuprofen, have a nice day. Here, take some ibuprofen, have a nice day. Then it became, here, take some morphine, have a nice day. Here, and so they're very leery about some of these things. So do your research. Be your advocate. Be your advocate. And remember, any drug they take, and this is important, I know that Nakia said earlier and Sue said it too, any drug they take takes a while to get in their system, okay? So any of the SSRIs, those kind of drugs, it takes a while to get in their system. And some of them, and I'm talking about a while, I'm not talking about a week or 2 weeks, some of them take 6 to 8 weeks to get in their system. And the other thing, before I wrap this up, you absolutely have to do, when you are taking these kind of drugs, you must push them to test for serum levels. You must push them to test for serum levels. It is the therapeutic level of that drug in their system because everybody's body metabolizes differently. So you must push for them to test for serum levels, especially when they first start taking it. Because it's going to get to a part where it becomes a functional level, and that's what you need it at. But sometimes your body doesn't metabolize it correctly. Sometimes your body metabolizes it too fast. Sometimes your body, because we're all different. So it is critically important that you get them to test for serum levels, and you've got to push it. You must push that, because they can be taking 90 pills and them not be at therapeutic levels, and they're never going to work. And that's another way to get your veteran to take the medication like they're supposed to, because you're going to talk about that. We got to get this level in. It's going to take 6 or 8 weeks, and then we're going to push the serum level, because it's probably not you. It could just be the way you're metabolizing the medication. And so now you kick it back to something else, and it will help them stay on task as far as taking their medication goes. But you must push serum levels. That is being an advocate. You want them to get help. You want them to get therapy. You want them to go on a drug regimen. You want them to do whatever. You absolutely have to push the other. So while we're asking them to do something, we all have to take accountability the same way. Right? This is a partnership. This is a relationship. As partners and relationships, this is what we do. So it is not one-sided here. This is what we do. So I hope this helps y'all some. I know it was a little, not the little typical rah-rah speech. We're going to really talk about some great alternatives that are out there and where you can start going and doing that and looking for alternatives. And y'all, grants. There are so many grants available. There are so many grants available to care. So we're going to, when it comes to some of the alternative treatments, we're going to talk about that too. All right, y'all. Y'all have a blessed day. Do not forget, let's talk tonight. I'm sure we got plenty to talk about. If you're on the East Coast coming through, be careful of the storms that are coming through because they've already been everywhere else. Tornadoes were everywhere in Alabama. So be blessed. Kind of stay out of the weather. I'm Stacy. This has been Loving My Veteran. Y'all have a blessed day, and I will see y'all tonight. Bye.